Good afternoon, everyone. I feel privileged and grateful to be here in this most historical of settings and to have the opportunity to contribute along with all of you and my many colleagues from the International Association of Women Judges on one of the most pressing subjects of our time. Over 200 years ago, on Tuesday, 12th May, 1789, a man called William Wilberforce stood up in the British House of Commons and delivered an impassioned speech that led eventually to the abolition of the slave trade. In the intervening 2 centuries, Britain has become one of the world's most pluralistic and tolerant nations, with a proud record of upholding human rights. However, the grim reality is that slavery still exists today in our towns and cities, just as it does in so many other parts of the world. It takes a very different form, of course, from the slave trade of the 18th century. Young girls are raped, beaten, passed from abuser to abuser, and sexually exploited for profit behind closed doors. Vulnerable men are tricked into long hours of hard labor before being locked away in cold sheds or run-down caravans. Men and women are made to work for little or no pay in fields, in factories, and on fishing vessels. Women are forced into prostitution. Domestic workers are imprisoned and made to work all hours of the day and night. The difference from Wilberforce's day is that then slavery was legal and in plain sight. Today, slavery is a crime, and the victims are usually hidden and often invisible to society. It is, of course, this invisibility that makes the crime so difficult and so challenging to tackle. The scale of this hidden crime is significant. Research carried out by the UK government estimates that we have between 10,000 and 13,000 victims of such crime. Many say, however, that the true number is much greater. Common countries of origin for victims of modern slavery in the UK's experience are Albania, Nigeria, Vietnam, Romania, and Poland. However, it is important to note that not all victims of modern slavery are tracked across borders. A high proportion of victims are, in fact, UK nationals. And of course, behind the statistics lie individual stories of individual human beings whose lives have been and are being destroyed. So what are we doing about it? The UK is bound, along with other European countries, by the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings. This involves a set of minimum standards on the identification, protection, and support of trafficking victims. Many charities, NGOs, and civil society organizations who work with victims have been expressing grave concerns for many years that this is not enough and that much more needed to be done. In the past few years, the government has taken a number of steps to try to rescue victims and to increase the number of prosecutions for this hideous crime in order to put slave masters behind bars where, of course, they belong. I would like to mention a few of these initiatives in particular, which I think are starting to make a difference in the UK. First, in 2015, the Modern Slavery Act was passed, and equivalent legislation was also passed in the Scottish Parliament and the Northern Irish Assembly. This is strong legislation, and it provides harsher sentences and new ways of convicting traffickers and slave masters. Legislation is a good starting point, but by itself, it is, of course, rarely enough. Successful prosecution depends on witnesses who need to be encouraged and supported to give evidence that will bring offenders to justice. It also requires dedicated police resources, and most of all, it requires greater awareness and engagement of the population as a whole. In recognition of these issues, the second thing the government has done is to extend the remit of the national referral mechanism. From 2015, all first responders, such as the police, the National Crime Agency, the UK Border Force, the Home Office Immigration and Visa Service, and social services, must first consider whether the person they are dealing with is a victim of human trafficking, or if not, whether they are the victim of another form of modern slavery, such as servitude or forced or compulsory labor. And if they are, various supports and safeguards are immediately put into place. Third, we now have an independent anti-slavery commissioner whose aim is to increase the identification of victims and to refer them for appropriate support, and in tandem to increase the number of prosecutions and convictions of trafficking and slave masters using what is known as the 4P paradigm: prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership. Last but by no means least, we have an anti-slavery day every year. This was established by an Act of Parliament, the Anti-Slavery Day Act. And this year it was marked on 18th October, so just a few weeks ago. All too often, stories emerge in the media of somebody who has been held captive in an ordinary residential neighborhood for years on end. And one has to ask how it is that the neighbors did not know. Did they not care? The Anti-Slavery Day initiative provides an important opportunity to raise awareness of human trafficking and modern slavery, and each year, more charities, more local authorities, police forces, and individuals organize events and even awards to raise the awareness of the issue and to remind people that the battle against slavery was not completed 2 centuries ago. The courts are also playing their part. There have been a number of positive decisions recently from our higher courts, including a decision from our Supreme Court as recently as 18th October this year, and I imagine it was no coincidence that the judgment was handed down on Anti-Slavery Day. The case arose out of a claim by 2 domestic workers against people who had diplomatic status and who invoked their immunity as foreign diplomats under the State Immunity Act. The Supreme Court decided that to allow diplomatic immunity to apply so widely went beyond the requirements of international law. The decision is hugely significant because overseas domestic workers working in embassies, approximately 75% of whom are women, are exceptionally vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, including trafficking, and are often subject to unfair and exploitative labor practices. Successful prosecution, of course, also depends on prosecutors, and here too there is room for hope. In October 2014, leading prosecutors from across the United Kingdom and Ireland, faced with figures that indicated a 22% increase in human trafficking in just 1 year, met and pledged to work together to tackle human trafficking and to share information across borders and jurisdictions. Although it is early days, the indications are that this cooperation is proving successful. I would like to leave you with one victim's story. I believed I was going to be safe and have a good life here. But when I came to this country, that was not the case. I was treated very, very badly. I was locked in a room and made to have sex with many men. They would come every day and make me do horrible things I did not want to do. They never cared if I cried. They never cared if I was hurt. They just carried on. The traffickers prostituted me for many months before I managed to run away, and I still feel the pain now. It will be in my heart and in my head forever. The evidence, the horrors, and stories such as these bring to mind Lord Wilberforce's words from over 200 years ago. You may choose to look the other way, but you can never, ever say again that you did not know. Thank you.